Here are the 7 mistakes non-US business owners make with US credit. See, after helping 500 plus of our non-resident clients access over $4.5 million in US credit, the reason why people keep making these same mistakes is because banks are not advertising what they're looking for from a non-resident. So people guess their way throughout the entire process, they get declined by banks and assume that American credit is impossible for their specific situation. Meanwhile, some non-US business owners that know the real requirements are unlocking 6-figure credit limits at 0% interest and the best redemption credit cards in the game. So the first mistake with a non-US business owner is treating Mercury and a US LLC as the finish line. I've seen so many different non-US business owners think that Mercury Bank or Slash Bank, these fintech bank accounts, are all that they can do in the US financial system, establishing your US LLC, maybe with Busy or maybe with Dula, and then opening up a business bank account. They think that that is all that they can do without noticing that they're being charged foreign transaction fees. They're getting the worst redemptions for a credit card to spend money on ads. And by having this belief that that is the finish line, it is costing you a lot of money. You could in fact unlock Chase Bank, the biggest banks in the world, American Express cards, and all of these different resources if you follow a legal process, which of course on a very high level it is get your ITIN, open up personal bank accounts, and then unlock business credit cards that are based on your personal credit. Because Mercury credit cards, fintech based credit cards, are based on your liquidity, like Brex, Mercury, all those other different platforms. And of course, they're not going to give you the best redemptions. They're not going to give you the best access to capital because it's based on liquidity and not on your credit. So as a non-US business owner, you got to build your credit, and then you can unlock the best credit cards in the game. The second mistake is incorporating in the wrong place. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people, when they're doing their incorporation, all they're thinking about is privacy and no taxes. But from a credit specialist perspective, a lot of people are trying to unlock the American financial system to get those financial tools to be able to use that capital and get the best redemption credit cards. And so along with the credit cards you're applying for, where you incorporate will determine a lot when it comes to your credit approvals, right? So when you think about Wyoming, Delaware, some people make these mistakes by incorporating in more quote unquote private states. You're not thinking about your credit approval odds, whereas personally, if I was to fund a client specifically, we'd rather incorporate you in Florida because there's the most amount of banks there. It's much easier to get access to capital and the best credit cards. And in this circumstance, of course, you're not going to have that privacy because the issuer, the banker, can see who owns the LLC. But in this context, it's going to help you when it comes to approval odds and credit and all this stuff. Now, of course, the reason that you would incorporate in a specific state is a multi-variable process, right? Like you're thinking about credit, you're thinking about taxes, you're thinking about all the different laws and those minute taxes. So I'm not here to say that Florida is the best place, but you need to keep in mind that privacy element or that element of credit. Based on the state that you're going for, it's going to impact the approval odds when it comes to the credit side. Now, moving on to the next mistake, it is using cheap, blacklisted, or weak addresses. When a lot of non-US entrepreneurs are told that you have to get a business address or a residential address, right away they go for Google and search, hey, how do you get a residential address? How do you get a business address? And they go for those very cheap products. I'm not here to say that some of them don't work, because absolutely some of them do work. And we've actually listed in our free community some of the different business address providers that are actually the best at cost, which you can check in the link down below. I've got a free community, talks about this whole process. But a lot of non-US entrepreneurs, they do not double check the address that are actually purchasing to put on their incorporation. And that in itself will actually affect your approval odds, right? So if you use a blacklisted address, a CMRA address, or a PO box, these specific categories are not going to lead to good approval odds. If that address is blacklisted, which by the way, there's a lot of addresses that are blacklisted, because in this context, if like 1,000 plus entrepreneurs are using that same address, they're going to blacklist it because they don't want people to abuse the system, and they're not going to want to deal with people with that specific address. So when you're choosing an address, make sure that it doesn't have these 3 things. Firstly, it's not blacklisted by the banks, which personally we can check that because we've got internal banking contacts. The second thing is make sure that it is not a CMRA address. And the third thing it is actually making sure that it's not a PO box. And how you can check these is going to smarty.com or any of those address verification platforms. You can do it absolutely for free. And pretty much you would be copying and pasting that address in that form, and they'll make sure and see, is it CMRA? Is it not CMRA? Is it a PO box? The only thing that you can't check is if it's on a blacklist, which of course, if you work with us directly, then we can take a look at that. Now, moving on to the next mistake, it is showing to the US unprepared. I cannot tell you the amount of clients that have approached me, right, taking a call with me and saying, hey, I went to the US, I opened up these accounts, what do I do at this point? And I just look at them frustrated because they just wasted thousands of dollars going to the US, opening up different types of accounts, missing out on one account, not opening up the bank account properly. And then in this context, I need to tell them, hey, dude, like, we might be able to do this process remotely, but it might be a bit risky because of these specific risk factors and whatnot. And I might need to tell them that they have to go back to the US. And so here's the thing. When it comes to a trip to the United States, you need to make sure that you're checking all the boxes. You're opening up certain personal bank accounts, certain personal credit cards, and if you need those business accounts, open up those business accounts as well, right? Make sure that you've checked all your boxes before you leave the United States. And when you come to the United States, you want to have the important necessary details, right? So if you need the ITIN, you should get your ITIN, which by the way, in our free community, there's a way that you can get a free done for you ITIN service. You can take a look at that in the free group in the description down below. And other things like your business address, your identification, all of these different important pieces of information you have to have before you approach the banks, because if you approach them in an unprofessional manner, they're going to treat you like that. And if you don't successfully go through a proper trip, then in this context, you might need to actually go back to the United States and spend thousands of more dollars on a trip. Now, moving on to the next mistake, it is actually delaying the process of starting your ITIN. Now, when I hear people ask questions about the ITIN, I always hear the same typical questions, right? If I get an ITIN, will I need to pay US taxes? To just make it very simple, you're not going to have to pay US taxes if you have an ITIN. It is just a identifier number that allows you to be identified within the US system. Now, of course, this is not tax advice, and there's multiple ways of actually getting an ITIN, which in some ways you might need to pay US taxes. But of course, with most of our clients, they're not paying US taxes and they're taking advantage of US financial products. The reason why delaying the ITIN is a huge mistake, because from a credit funding perspective, one of the biggest elements out of determining your credit approvals is your actual credit age. And if you don't have long credit age, then in this context, it's going to be harder for you to get $100,000 approvals or the best premium credit cards in the US game. And so if you, for example, don't need US credit right away, at least get your ITIN so you can build up the age of that ITIN. And then once you want to get credit cards, once you want to go and take full advantage of the US system, then you can start doing that. But the sooner you get your ITIN, the longer your credit age. And so that's why I keep emphasizing, get that ITIN. And again, it's going to be a 3-month waiting process regardless. It's plus minus a month or so, right? Sometimes it takes 5 months, sometimes it takes 2 months, right? It all depends on the IRS processing anyways. But just getting that ITIN is one of the biggest hurdles, I would say, throughout this whole process. So now let's move on to the next mistake, which is being impatient with business credit. A lot of entrepreneurs, they look at business credit and they're like, I want to just get the business credit cards. I'm going to show up to the US. I don't want personal credit cards. I'm going to get business credit cards because I run a business. Again, right? Like, you're spending a lot of money on ads. You want to use the best credit card. And in this context, that is a huge mistake, because what you're going to do essentially here is apply for a business credit card with a terrible personal credit profile. And with that profile, you're using that profile to then get the business credit cards. If you have a bad profile, do not use that personal credit profile to get business credit cards. What we do typically with our clients that have nothing set up in the US is we get their ITIN, we set up their corporation, we do all of those details, get personal credit cards, and after 6 months, then fund their business with the business credit cards. And so that's just kind of like a typical understanding of the timeline that you would expect on the business side. And moving on to the 7th mistake, it is ignoring your tax compliance and knowing how the actual US system works. There's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people saying you have to pay taxes, you don't have to pay US taxes. I'm just telling you right here, You've got to make sure that you're working with the right team that will support you and will make sure that based on your business activities, you are incorporating with the right incorporation. You are sending money into certain accounts to make sure that you are not burdened by taxes or you are self-taxing yourself. So making sure that you've checked all the boxes also related to your business activities, incorporating within the right state, making sure that you're completely compliant, and make sure that you're doing all of your annual filings, because even though you're a non-US citizen, you still have to file specific files every single year to maintain your incorporation. It's very important to highlight this because I look at a lot of non-US entrepreneurs, they incorporate and then they forget about their entity, right? It's very important that you maintain it, you work with the right team, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So those are the 7 critical mistakes that keeps non-US business owners locked out of the American credit system. But here's the good news. Every single one of these mistakes are completely avoidable if you know what you're doing. So if you're serious about accessing US credit the right way without wasting months and months of trial and error, I've created a 6-month roadmap, which you can watch the video right here on what we do with clients to access their first $100,000 in US credit. So click here to watch the full video. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.